All right, so hello everyone. Welcome to CDS RADOS. So we have a few items in the Etherpad, which is already in the chat. But for most things, we have Trello boards that have been marked with specific, some that can be marked as we go along. And I'd like to keep this very open and very interactive. If there are items that people want to add or talk about, let's just use this time to do that. Does that sound good? I'm guessing that's yes. Silence is yes.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so there are some items that have been added by some folks, I guess. The first one is dedupe and Turing. Do we have the interested parties on the call, or we wait for those? We can go through the Trello and come back to the Etherpad later. That makes more sense. Either is fine, whatever.
Looks like we have Sam
takers?
and Young1 were the folks that relevant to the dedupe and Turing, I believe.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about dedupe now. I think
Cool.
Young1 had a presentation, unless I'm mistaken. Can you hear us?
Yep.
Ah, there we are.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. I'm Myung-won from Samsung Electronics. Today, I'm going to talk about current status of Turing dedupe and its plan. 2 years ago, I started design and developing deduplication on SAP with Sage. Sage gave me the basic idea for deduplication on SAP. So based on that, I have implemented manifest Turing on SAP. So I'm going to share the past and present of deduplication on SAP, and then I will tell you the remaining issues and the next step. Regarding the next steps, Sam will talk about the plan after my presentation. So let me start with the background of conventional deduplication system. The figure describes the deduplication procedure in a typical system. Typically, an object is divided into several chunks by chunking algorithm, and then dedupe system generate a fingerprint values for each chunk data. To check whether the chunk is unique in the storage system, we need a fingerprint index, which store mapping information between the fingerprint and the location of the chain. It helps us to get the location of data fast and easily. So by looking up the fingerprint index, the storage system can know where the real data is located. However, we face the first problem here. Fingerprint index is a key metadata in dedupe system. So it could be recorded on the key value DB or file system. But let's think of the situation where the number of chunks is too large, so that fingerprint index cannot be stored in a single metadata server or whatever. Moreover, fingerprint index should not be limiting factor for scaling the storage system. Therefore, the fingerprint index should be distributed evenly and efficiently across the cluster. This is the problem most of dedupe system is facing. In summary, the first problem is scalability of fingerprint index. Our problem was that adding new metadata for fingerprint index she requires the changes of the EC system. For example, dedupe engine requires a new metadata such as fingerprint index and recipe store for dedupe. But how can we add new metadata into EC system? So this is not an easy question because dedupe's metadata also needs to be fault tolerant. For instance, as you can see on the bottom figure, there is a data placement scheme used by SAP. But how can we build on dedupe system which is compatible with the SAP's data placement? So we focus on how to effectively and easily add this feature to existing system while not changing existing functions, but using them. So our key idea to solve the first problem is double hashing. As you know, SAP hashes on object ID to decide where to locate the given data. The problem is how to relocate this data based on the contents of the data while maintaining the mapping information. So our approach is to use another hash function whose input is the fingerprint and output is the new object ID. So please look at the right figure. Plant 1 has OID1. By using crush, we can get the location of OID1. After that, if we do generate hash value once again based on the object contents, we can get the location of data A in the right figure. So first hash stores the data in the same way as SAP does, while second fingerprint hash decide to actual location. It means that we use the hashed fingerprint value as on object ID at the second hash round. So if we only maintain the mapping information from on object ID to hashed ID, global deduplication can be achieved without requiring metadata server. There is no need to look up for the related information in the other loader. And by using hash, we can also distribute metadata evenly. To resolve the second problem, we propose the concept of self-contained object. Self-contained object has object data and dedupe data within an object. So any initial implementation is not necessary. We choose to use extended attribute as a metadata store. It could be efficiently integrate with SAP. As a result, the new metadata does not affect SAP's reliability. Let's move on the next slide. Based on the key ideas, I will explain the design of deduplications on SAP. First thing I want to explain is object. We add a type field in object info T to distinguish between manifest object and chunk object. Manifest object has original object ID, while chunk object has the hash object value. And manifest object has chunk map, which include offset range, chunk ID, cache bit, and dirty bit. On the other hand, chunk object has reference count, and lastly, tables have data pair. But these two objects are just object, like other objects in OnSAP from logical point of view. Second is pool. which is logical group of objects. Thus, there are two pool for the corresponding object type. Manifest pool stores the metadata objects, and chunk pool stores chunk object. Since each pool has different purpose and usage, they can be managed more efficiently if we consider their characteristic. For example, each pool can have independent redundancy scheme, such as duplication, erase coding, depending on its usage, and they can be placed on different storage locations depending on required purpose. Next item I want to share is implementation detail. Unfortunately, there is a lot of practical issues when implementing duplication as designed I described. So the implementation applied to upstream is a bit different from original suggestion. As you already know, the efficiency of dedupe depends on workload characteristic. So if there are only a few duplicate chunks, so using dedupe is not a good idea. So we think dedupe should be applied selectively. So the concept is that try to figure out the rate of duplicate chunk first, and then perform deduplication for the objects in the target pool if the dedupe rate is high. These slides should describe how we can make a dedupe object using RADOS API like set chunk. First, to make two object, first thing we need to do is to configure current tier to enable fingerprint and chunk algorithm. Second is to divide an object in chunk. To do that, set chunk is used. Set chunk needs many parameters as input, but what important is that it creates a chunk based on the given offset and range of offset and length. After finishing the configuration, dedupe will work whenever you read or write the target. One thing to note is flush scheme. Unlike existing tier, flush will happen if tier flush is called, or if all chunk chunked objects are dirty. When flush occurs, fingerprints are generated from the chunk and then send them to the chunk pool. Also, there is a dedupe tool to supplement the deduplication implement. The dedupe tool has two roles. First one is that we find out the optimal chunks, the optimal chunk length to a given pool, such as there is a pool, and if we run dedupe tool on that pool repeatedly and with changing chunk parameters, optimal chunk length will be found because its results show how many chunks are dedupe. Second one is fixing reference leak. As you know, reference counting for dedupe is false positive, so reference leak can happen. To resolve this leak, dedupe tool has a function that is search for the reference leak between a manifest object and chunk object, then fix it. The last topic is discussion. As you can see, master code, two tiering version coexist. First one is existing tiering that support various cache modes such as proxy, write back, and write through. Another one is manifest tiering for deduplication. There are two implementation have a similar concept because both have tiering structure, but they do not share the code. I think this a bit inefficiency. A big difference between existing tier and manifest tier is graduality. The former is pool basis, so that source pool tightly coupled to target pool. The latter is object based, so the object can point target object in any pool, like symbol link. If we add cache mode such as write back and write through into manifest tiering, it would be good because the user makes use of both cache and DB. Second discussion point is just my thought. Emerging best device like GSSD, most of dispute system suffer from performance degradation. To resolve such performance problem like Weka.io, many storage systems have to try to maximize performance via cache tier. So I think we need to rethink about current cache tier on ZAP. As you know, cache doesn't need strong consistency or consistency. So ZAP share IOPS both tiering and original case. It was great in terms of code reusability. However, if we think of the cache itself, it is too heavy to deal with the post-processing IO's best. Another topic to be discussed is next step for deduplication. Basic function for SAP for dedup have been implemented on SAP master branch, but they need to be more user-friendly, provide high compatibility and have concrete user scenario. To do so, I have plans to implement that, but then will explain other next step related to the tiering dedup in detail. Yeah. That's all. Thank you for listening.
Sam, did you have anything to add?
I think we should come back to this weak consistency concept. We should discuss that a bit at the end. For now, though. All right. I came up with a quick. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I came up with a quick summary of sort of two broad categories of what we want to do going forward with this. So the first observation is that much of the previous presentation is focused on the manifest tiering work, which if you look at the code at the actual implementation, it's essentially parallel to the cache tiering implementation within the OSD, and it has a lot of duplicated code. But that, strictly speaking, isn't necessary or even helpful for implementing dedupe in RGW. RGW already has a metadata indirection layer in the head object for multi-part uploads and also just large objects in general. So adapting that to use the ref counting class in the OSD directly would save an entire layer and would be vastly simpler to implement. It's also more efficient since you have to read that head object anyway. So I think for dedupe purposes, since our primary target is RGW, we should actually ignore all of the manifest work at first. I think more design work will need to be done here, and we'll need to, if anyone from the RGW side wants to discuss that a bit, that would be good. But like I said, a major advantage here is that you don't have to rework the interior of the OSD, so it's likely to be a great deal easier. Semantically, it's pretty straightforward. RGW already sees the data stream as it comes in, as it does the writes, so it runs some kind of a hashing scheme, or sorry, content hashing scheme to find chunk boundaries, and then writes them out to the ref counting pool as needed, and then simply writes the head object with those references in it. The ref counting class already does the actual atomic ref counting component, so that's no big deal. Of course, that won't work for RBD or SFFS, where we don't really want to store like an external literal manifest for each object at a different layer. So for those purposes, there are a number of things we want to clean up in the existing manifest code. I'm not going to go over these in detail, but oh shoot, those are like 4 copies of the same thing. Okay. Anyway, so much of it is inconsistency with how it behaves with snapshots and some inconsistencies with how the redirect code specifically behaves. So I have a branch with some documentation cleanups to explain those properties, and we'll create some bugs to deal with them. The next big component we want to address is we don't want 2 tiering implementations, and the existing cache tiering implementation is a world of pain. So we would probably like to replace it completely with this new manifest concept, in that it ought to be more flexible, with the slight difference that there must be at least a manifest object for each object, unlike the existing cache tiering machinery, which deals in whiteouts, right? So there are sort of 3 broad things we need to deal with here. One is that the flush evict agent thread isn't a fundamental architectural difference between the 2 implementations. It's just that the agent thread isn't wired up to deal with the manifest objects. So that's a modest amount of work that I think would get us a fair amount of benefit. The other thing that we're sort of leaving on the table is that regardless of what we want to do here, it's super valuable, whether it's an external tiering agent or one built into the OSD, to be able to find out how recently an object has been accessed. Fortunately, there is already support in the OSD for tracking hit sets, and it actually has very little to do with cache sharing. It's just that it's enabled automatically depending on the pool type. So we just need to adapt the pool types there to enable it on pools that aren't cache tier pools and are instead manifest pools or normal pools. So we need to give it its own separate set of config options. And finally, it needs to properly support snapshots. The current code is mostly wrong in that regard. I didn't finish the slide before Youngwon finished, but the long and the short of it is that up until now, there is no LibRADOS operation that directly mutates a clone. The one exception might be, I didn't look closely, but there might be a repair operation that sort of has that effect. My suggestion here is that we actually create a class of LibRADOS operations that are allowed to mutate a clone, and which do not trigger the that is, they trigger a rep op like trim does, but they don't trigger any of the snap context stuff. This would allow us to just allow things like set chunk to be done directly on a clone by a LibRADOS client that knows what it's doing. It would also allow us, I think, to create a somewhat less confusing scrub repair story. So I think this is a positive step generally. There are a few big. What's that?
It's also something that Jason's been asking for RBD for forever.
Oh, to directly mutate a clone?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, he just wants to. He has a repair, like a scrub repair thing, and right now he has to delete everything.
That's exactly what I'm saying. It would allow us a much less weird and awkward scrub repair story. Yeah,
I would be happy with just something that lets me delete a full object with its full clone set, because I can repair just one object. But yeah, right now the only thing I can do is basically eliminate the entire RBD image and start over from scratch. So I have to delete all the clones or the snapshots.
Yeah, so we'll have to think carefully about what the semantics will be for each one of the operations that behaves like this will be a little bit dangerous. So we'll have to think carefully what the semantics are. But I think it'll be good. But this is also super invasive, so we'll have to think carefully. I lost my train of thought.
Why do you want to do this for dedupe? Is it just so you can dedupe the snapshots?
Okay, so if you think about it, suppose an object has, I don't know, 20 clones, right? So it's already possible to introspect what clones there are and what their overlaps are. So a smart tiering agent might observe that, let's say, the 10th clone sees a lot of read traffic, but none of the other ones do. So it wants to selectively dedupe and evict all of the extents for the inactive clones and only promote back in the extents that are relevant. And that set might change over time. So with the existing cache steering code, we sort of conveniently didn't have to worry about this by creating an invariant that said all clones between some arbitrary C and the head exist, and we get to move C depending on how active the object is. But if just the very oldest clone is active and none of the interior ones are, all of the interior ones have to exist. And they have to exist in their entirety. They can't be just partially present. But with manifests, because we get to do more than have the object be just present or non-present, we want to be able to simply mutate that manifest. It shouldn't change the actual contents of the object. Like one of the rules here should be that it isn't possible to make any of the non-special LibRADOS objects return a different answer by running one of these commands, excepting, of course, the scrub repair ones or things of that nature. But we do want to be able to selectively say, no, I'm actually doing a mutation on this object. It's just not one that changes normal LibRADOS level results. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Youngwon, did any of that make sense? Or I think it's pretty much what I emailed you, so.
Yeah, actually looks good to me.
Okay, so I wanted to back up to the cache concept. Generally speaking, weak consistency doesn't describe very much on its own. That pair of words isn't super descriptive. If what you're asking for is a client-level non-persistent cache, I think there are implementations of that, like floating around already, right? For RBD at least. And that's where you'd want to do it. You wouldn't want to go over the network for I don't know what the word would be, an ephemeral write, right? Like,
actually, I mean, the weak consistency I mentioned is some kinds of RADOS level. So without any ordering, so the request
the only
user.
ordering requirements you actually get in LibRADOS are in the object itself from the same client. Most applications want that. That's desirable.
I mean, without any changes in client.
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is I'm not sure what semantics you're looking for.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is before you embark on a POC, it would probably be worth writing down what it is you're interested in doing, what changes to LibRADOS level guarantees you want to make and why.
Yeah. So before discussing in more detail these three slides, I have to prepare some document to explain more detail. Yeah.
Okay. I did want to reiterate though, the best bang for our buck for dedupe, despite where we spent our time, is almost certainly to avoid messing with the OSD at all for RGW. Do you see what I mean by that, Young-Kwon?
Sorry.
The best bang for our buck in terms of workloads that would benefit well from dedupe are probably in RGW, and that doesn't require any of this manifest support at all. All it requires is the atomic ref counting stuff that already exists. That is, we can modify RGW to just explicitly write down which dedupe tier object it's pointing at. There's already a metadata layer in RGW for that.
Yeah, already RGW has already such kind of metadata.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we'll have to look at it in more detail, but the short answer is that most of the time the head object doesn't contain the entire contents of the object. It also contains pointers to other objects with some offsets.
Yeah.
Because RGW objects can be far, far larger than a RADOS object.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's RGW used to be to hold just a map of offsets to RADOS objects in its manifest, and later on we extended it to use more of a shorthand way to describe it. But the support for that mapping still exists, although we don't use it right now. So that this solution might require using the old explicit placement method we used to use.
And I think for scenarios where we're looking at sort of whole object dedupe, that will be a good combo. Like you only need to store one in that, or sorry. I guess that's a good point. Even for whole object dedupe, you would still need to store a pointer to each RADOS object because it won't do an indirection to another RGW object. Anyway, it's something we can look at in more detail. It's a smaller problem, I think, than generalizing libRADOS to support manifests.
Sam, I had a question. Even for RGW, you think the concept that was described earlier about dedupe score or the dedupe tool telling us which pools or which objects we should be doing deduplication on still applies, right?
I'm a little ambivalent on that score, actually. So for one thing, there's no reason you couldn't reach in and change the RGW headers the same way. So that design choice is orthogonal, I feel. But given that RGW sees the whole object stream, it seems like you may as well do a Raven hashing then, right? Perhaps not, but I think that decision is orthogonal, in other words. There could be an RGW tool that scans over, or a subcommand that scans over the some subset of the pool and looks for dedupe opportunities and generates chunk size recommendations. I think that's all still possible.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The only question is whether you're embedding the metadata in something RGW knows about or hiding it under libRADOS.
Right.
RGW sees the whole stream, but it's been broken and chunked, and the way it writes it out means that it might be complicated to embed it when it's looking at it. So I'm not sure.
Like I said, be that as it may, it's still possible you can build an external RGW tool that goes back over the existing objects, just as you would be able to for RADOS. That part's not different.
Right.
Or not obviously different anyway.
Right. Any more questions? Any more? Cool. Then I guess just we need to wait for the POC from my I don't know how I'm pronouncing your name right or not. My Young Wang, sorry, I'm right.
Well,
but
that would be for some theoretical weekly consistent.
Yeah,
I think we should just not worry about for now. That's a longer term goal, I think.
Yeah. No, I guess my question is, what are we aiming? What pieces are we aiming for Pacific?
I would like to see the cleanups I've outlined in the existing manifest code in, and we'll have to discuss whether we'd rather go for the RGW thing, which I think is the simpler option, or make progress towards better snapshot support. But I think it depends on on sort of how much bandwidth there is to work on it.
Yeah, makes sense. Right, then let's move on to the next topic. In the third part, we have other RADOS topics, which I believe we can go at the end. We have NVMe fabrics. Is there anybody on the call who'd be interested to talk about that? Yes, not? Okay, so maybe let's just go over the RADOS topics. We have our Trello backlog, which has a bunch of topics that we can just go over and figure out what else we can add to the Pacific. I think Josh already shared the Trello board. So yeah, I guess I'm not going to cover Blue Store. We did cover Blue Store a little bit in the performance series this morning. So we'll go over RADOS, Mon, Manager, Messenger, and then the common stuff. Yeah, the first one here was, I think, a topic that Sage had added last year, I guess, 2018. Sage, are you here on the call?
I am. What are we looking at? Sorry,
we're looking at the backlog, the Trello backlog, and we're looking at the RADOS list there. And the first one on the list there is one if insufficient capacity to tolerate failure at crush level. And I know.
Yeah, there was a user who was asking for this, but we've never really prioritized it. The idea would be that if their failure domain is rack or host, let's say it's host, you'd want to issue a warning if the failure of any single host would make the cluster fill up.
Yeah.
Seems like something that we should do at some point, but I don't know how important it is. We can move it down, I think.
All right. All right, so okay. Next, there is simple adaptive recovery settings. This was there earlier. Was earlier marked for Octopus. We decided not to do it because we had other recovery stuff going, and we had partial recovery, and we had some EC recovery below min size things going in. But I think this is still relevant, and hence I've marked it for Pacific again, because there are people still coming and asking for it. What do others think? Does it make sense to everybody?
Good to me.
Cool. All right. Then the next one on the list is, again, something that could be useful. So it's distinguish unfound versus impossible to find. And this is again mostly when there is some disaster recovery or like something goes wrong in the cluster, people come asking for this feature again and again. So I guess it's a matter of improving our listing unfound objects that really are useful to recover or not is the ask here. I know David had started looking at this a little bit and did do some initial work there, but I don't think there was any patch that went into Octopus. So we just retargeted this for Pacific. Then the next item on the list is distributed tracing. And we have Deepika from the RADOS team who's working on this. So the idea of this Trello board is to have Jaeger-based distributed tracing, at least in the OST, to some extent merged for Pacific. Josh, do you want to go into more detail into this, or should we just leave it at that?
Yeah, I think at a minimum, I'd like to see the OST side this merge for Pacific, and also Google Summer Code projects for RTW and the kind of client side of this. So we may be able to get some of that in as well.
Yeah.
The existing patches are they're functional, but they still need some work on the build side to make the dependencies line up well, and it's almost there.
Yeah. Yeah, for what's worth, we already have a PR which is under work. As Josh mentioned, we're just trying to sort out the dependencies and trying to make it build a dependent source tree, I guess. So we will hopefully get that in. The next one here is map device errors. OST crash back to devices. I think this thought something that Yarit may be interested. Yarit, have you looked at this card? This kind of fits in with the telemetry stuff.
Yeah. I don't think I saw this one.
Maybe not. It's been there here. So we just recently went through the list and marked it for Pacific. But it'd be good to know what you think, and maybe Sage also.
Trying to remember what I was thinking when I added this.
Yeah,
that was my question. I was looking for a description. I made the best sense out of.
I think I remember the context here.
Was it? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The idea here is that when we have I/O errors from the device, we just repair them immediately now, and instead of tracking where they came from, like which disk, if it's from like the DB or the main device, for example. And we don't even have any kind of like performance counters, which would be like a minimum for telling what happened when you had an I/O error. It would be ideal if we could actually capture those more persistently and report them, maybe at least to the user, if not to telemetry as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'll fill in a longer description there so that more than what I can remember.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are a few things that I think Josh and I had looked at the list and already marked for Pacific, but then there's a bunch of other stuff that's already there. So maybe you can quickly skim through them and see which other top can still make it to Pacific. I wouldn't be too worried about the reporting of slow ops and in health detail. But I guess this object per job to delete an object and all its associated clones. This is the one that Jason was just mentioning, I guess. So.
Yeah, I think waiting for the changes Stan was talking about makes sense there.
Yeah.
We could do sort of a one-off something that would just do that one thing, but I'd rather make sure it's sort of schema. I wonder if just the class CAS part of the dedupe work though, which reserves a card. This would just be the object class that manages the reference counts on objects that are being consumed by either the manifest tiering step or by RJW directly. But I think just having that class like well documented with a set of tests that exercise it and validate that references aren't leaked or whatever it is cleaned up would be useful.
There's already a refcount class. Is that doing anything similar to this?
It's a little bit different because the refcount class doesn't. It assumes that the number of references are small. It has like a tag or a reference, like a back pointer descriptor string or whatever for every reference. And so the CAS one, the intention the design originally was that it would start out with a full back pointer to like the object or whatever it was that referenced it. But as you added more references, the back pointers would decrease in resolution, so you could bound the total amount of back pointer space. So you can imagine in the extreme, it just says that there are like a million references from this pool, and you don't necessarily know which objects, but at least it works. I forget how much of that, what the current status of the implementation is. But I think it feels like the important thing is just to define the interface for the references themselves, for getting and putting references. Doing rights.
I guess I'd be a little cautious about trying to implement something like that before we understood fully the users of it. Seems like we've done a few of these in the past, and it would be more helpful if we knew that it was doing the right thing, like that API we were providing was the one that we were going to finally consume.
I mean, so just have RGW consume it and then make sure it works well for that before we assume it's also going to be the same thing that RADOS uses.
Just design the RGW use of it before writing it.
Yeah, that's probably. I mean, it's already written. That's not the fancy ref counting resolution part, but the class is already there. I think the main thing is just the tests. The test, so we have good confidence that it's doing the right thing.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have to put it up here, really, but I guess I would hope to see tests. That's all.
Okay, the next one that's on the list is about NUMA mem policy support. This is another card. This does not have option, but again, there must be something in Sage's mind about this one.
Which one?
The NUMA, OST NUMA set mem policy support.
Oh, right. So, so there's a set of patches in there that try to automatically detect what NUMA node your network card and your NVMe are on. And if they're on the same NUMA node, then it pins your the process CPUs on that NUMA node. But I can't remember why I was looking at this, but there's a parallel set of there's another thing you can do about memory, where you basically also confine the process to memory that's attached to that NUMA node. And it's the set mem policy thing, and there was some reason why I couldn't automatically figure out. I think it was that you have to set it before the process starts. I think that was what it was. Whereas the pinning the other CPU stuff can happen after you start it up and the OSD is initialized and start up Blue Store, and so it knows what NVMe's it's using, all that stuff. Whereas the setmem policy stuff, as far as I can tell, the only way to do it is you run NUMA control and you set the flags, then you give it cepOSD with all the arguments, and it sets something up and then spawns the process. So I wasn't sure how to deal with that, whether it's like reforking or doing something weird, or just giving up and not trying to do this at all. But this card is just to remember that it doesn't do it right now.
Okay. So I really don't think I want to go down the whole list, because there'll be a lot of items that we probably don't want to do, and that's why they're lower in the list.
Yeah.
I'd rather cover the other. Let's look at Mon Manager and other stuff. So in Mon, I think the first item we have is reg stuff. The leader election, score-based leader election stuff, which I think the first PR is almost ready. PR piece will also be ready soon enough, so we can safely target it for Pacific and maybe backborder as well.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Got a second monitor column. I was trying to find it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Short answer. I like it. Not done there then. Yeah, the second card is about control OSD map trimming, and there's been a PR that has been lying around for a while, and I really think we should get it to a state, merge it, because it's been causing a lot of, we've seen a lot of issues in the field because of this. It'd be really nice to have this, so that's why I added it here. And I believe Joa has been updating this PR recently and testing it as well.
Yep.
Yeah, hopefully this is also something we can get in, but we should just review it one more time, because it's been there for a long time and maybe there are some aspects that we want to include. All right, so beyond this, all right, Kifu says that he'll do it at ASAP. Thanks, Kifu. The next one is again about severity of degradedness in Ceph health, and it's also something that came from the field, I'd say. But the idea is that when there are events that are happening in the cluster, like migration and things like that, Ceph health could give us more hints as to how much more degraded the cluster would become if we perform certain actions. This, in general, in the OSD logs, we do have information about it. We have update cal stats telling us everything about how degraded each of the OSDs are or what is needed. But to have that reflected in Ceph health would probably be more useful for users to also have an idea of what they are about to do or like what they're going to get into.
Yep. That sounds like something where we just have to think carefully about exactly how it will be worded. Not confusing.
Yeah. There is a BZ attached to that that Kyle had opened. I don't know if it's visible to everybody, but he had some ideas about, like, at least for EC, how that would look like.
Yeah.
But yeah, now that we're talking about this, is there anything else that we think should be added to our Ceph health detail stuff that is not there right now or is less intuitive right now?
For me, it's just the blocked ops or stuck ops or whatever. That's the one that I've been getting tripped up on. I think that there's already a card for that somewhere else.
Yeah.
Or maybe we resolved it in Pacific. I can't remember.
No, it's about the details of slow ops or where they are stuck.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, there are actually two cards. I think one was explored a little bit about wherever we generally have something like waiting on read-write locks. We don't have a reason of why or as to why it doesn't have the lock right now. So we tried to explore that, and it turned out to be non-trivial as to how we would populate that information. But we might have to spend more time on that to figure out a best way to do that.
I think at the very least we can design Crimson's strategy for reporting that it tries to capture that information from the beginning.
Yeah. And I also think we didn't end up doing it, but we decided that at least wherever we are adding that information about waiting on read-write locks, in that particular function or in that particular place in the code, we could make it more obvious, at least with debug messages or other things like that, that could give us a chain of
for
traces.
Crimson, at least, I actually created a subsystem that it gets any time you're blocked on a read-write lock or whatever, it actually registers itself in a list you can dump from the admin socket. So if something actually does get stuck, there will be a way to find that op and why it's stuck, provided that we continue using that mechanism. But it is something I've been thinking about.
Excellent.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning this, but you also said that this was something that couldn't be done for the classic OSD, or like we couldn't just use the same framework.
Definitely not. You'd have to go back through and rewrite the classic OSD.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Crimson, and I was saying this is something we are considering, or at least something I think is important.
All right, then that topic just enough, I guess. I guess those were the three top things that we know we want to get into Pacific, but there are other non-things here as well. Rework of commands. Yeah, I thought there was a PR from Joao for reworking the commands at some point, but still in the books. Not sure. Okay, so I think we can move on to manager now. For manager, we have avoid scale down. So yeah, this is the last piece of improvement we wanted to do for PG autoscaler to avoid scale down until there's basically a back pressure mechanism to reduce the number of PGs. We did a couple of things already in Pacific with the default number of PGs the pool starts out with, and also the auto tuning of the PG log lengths. But this is the last piece that if we get that in, I think we should be in good shape for all kinds of use cases.
This Travis brought this up a couple weeks ago. I can't remember who I mentioned it to, but he was running into a problem with Rook where on a sort of a trivial 3 OSD cluster, as soon as you create one file system and one object store, the number of pools created is enough where the default of 32 PGs per pool exceeds the max.
Yeah, I talked to him more about this like last week or 2 weeks ago, and he's going to fix it, I think, in Rook by using the same configuration that RGW uses when it's creating those pools. So RGW has its own configure setting that it sets it to a minimum of like 16. Yeah, PG min is 16 instead.
Okay.
And
cool.
Yeah, same for the SFFS. It's already handled because it's using the SFFS best new command, which does that internally.
Cool. Okay.
So that's a change in Rook, I believe, right, Josh?
Yeah, exactly, because Rook is creating those pools.
Rook is creating those pools.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, I guess this is actually we've discussed this topic in a CDM or something enough, so I don't think there's much more discussion required here. The next is about manager telemetry, RGW, REM, zone info.
Yeah, I think the idea here was just to include as much interesting information as we can about how the multi-site RGW stuff is being used. I think there's some really, really basic information being included right now, but I forget exactly what it was. So this actually would probably be something for somebody like Yehuda or Raleigh to look at and just see what is easily included that isn't already there.
Do we want to include it together with other changes to the telemetry version? So would that hold the changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should, when we backport it, so we basically, as soon as we add the next thing, we'll bump it to V4, and then we'll just keep adding stuff in master to V4. But whenever we do a backport, we should try to like lump it all together so we minimize the times that people have to opt in. And try to delay that backport as long as possible so that it's there's more of it.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Okay, so the next topic here is efficient use of large C++ structures. And I guess this has a good description. And this is also something we've seen in our customers and our user environments. So we've been adding a lot of manager modules, and a lot of them are now on by default, because of which we have a lot of extra CPU cycles in processing redundant information. Like one example would be what we recently observed in the network ping time feature that we had, because of which we actually didn't realize that we were sending a lot of extra information that we didn't need in the manager modules, and we could easily get rid of that. And this card actually popped up from there that we should probably go and investigate where are the other pieces in the manager or in the manager modules that we are doing that. The other item, I think, is the balancer. And I know there are a few patches that are already trying to optimize this by reducing or like only trying to get the required information and try to save it for future purposes and not try to fetch it every time. So I guess that's the idea of this card. So we'll have to probably go and look where other opportunities of improvement are there. Josh, did you have anything else to add? Or?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, like David's existing patches can address a lot of these. We just need to test them at a larger scale, like on the LRC, to see if there's still hotspots.
Yeah.
Because these are the kind of things that only pop up with larger clusters.
Yeah. But yeah, talking of that, I'm going a little off topic, but we did decide that every time now we are going to be doing releases, we want to install it in a lab cluster, let it run for like a few days, and then do a release. But if we could also add some sort of monitoring system, which would look out for these kind of things, manage like CPU usage, memory usage, and have some sort of graphical way to look at this, it would be really useful. I know, Josh, you said that we had something of this sort, but I don't know what happened after that.
I'm not sure if it's still set up or not. I should probably ask David Galloway or Sage if you are familiar.
About what monitoring there is in the lab?
Yeah.
I think there's like a Nagios thing somewhere, but I think it only goes to David. I'm not actually sure.
Okay.
It goes to.
I thought there was like something set up with the Ceph metrics or something earlier with the trying to get the more specific stats.
Well, now that it's upgraded to Octopus, the dashboard and stuff is all there. Although, actually, that's one thing that needs to get cleaned up because a lot of the stuff is deployed manually. So the automatic Ceph stuff didn't actually work because it was conflicting with the stuff that was already there. So probably should try to straighten that out. But in theory,
Okay.
probably what we want to do is make sure that the like automatic step ADM monitoring stuff actually works and actually use it. Because I think all the pieces are there, but they should be there. Prometheus Alert Manager and whatever else. But I guess somebody has to look at it.
Is this kind of data feasible to send back with telemetry, or is it too much or too invasive for users, do you think?
Which kind of data?
The monitoring about CPU stats, you wanted to try and spot this in the wild.
I don't know, I'm wondering, it would just send like an array of CPU loads or something, or like CPU usage stats for different daemons.
I don't actually know what we gather with
Yeah.
our existing stuff, if anything, but
Yeah,
you know.
nothing is performance related right now. But maybe it could be. I think we'd have to think a little bit about how to present it and aggregate it so it's not a lot of data, but it's still the data that we're after.
But it's going to be a lot of relative data, right? I mean, how do you know that what you're seeing is not right?
Yeah.
Probably have better ideas of how to do that after we get the load cluster working and can dog for things and kind of see what we do manually and try to automate some of that.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. See, the next is balancer. Consider number of primaries for read performance. So, yeah, so I think currently the problem is that the balancer in the up map mode just looks at the number of PGs per OST. And this card is coming from the idea that if we could also consider the number of primaries that are present on a particular OST and try to spread the load, then we could probably get better performance and not create hotspots.
Mm-hmm.
And also with Pacific, we are planning to turn the balancer on by default in up map mode. So we probably want to monitor what other improvements we can do to this to the balancer in general.
Yeah, that's the next card as well. More balancer improvements, kind of in the same vein, bouncing by
Yeah.
including the bytes and OMAP space used.
Yeah.
Since these are kind of all different dimensions that it may be in slight conflict, we might want to have some kind of configuration. I think right now the only configuration for the the question compat balance mode is an order list, but just with the weight, I'm not sure. We might want to think about how to make that more easily configurable, so you can choose which kind of characteristics you're balancing by. Or
All right. So I guess we will be seeing a bunch of balancer improvements in Pacific. Let's just say that.
Is the plan to switch to the up map stuff like quickly in master? Like,
yeah, that's the idea. That's the idea. And we'd probably have to, or we need to change the min compat client to Luminous. Earlier it was Joule, so change that, have the balancer on, and set the mode to up map. And I was planning to just create a PR and let's just test that and see what else needs to be done, I guess.
The sooner the better. Sounds good.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, the next one is about automated OSD reprovisioning.
So the original driving motivation for this was to create something that was smart and safe that would convert files to Blue Store, and use the orchestrator APIs to reprovision, delete old OSDs, and create new ones out of the same devices. The problem is that FADM only supports Blue Store. It doesn't support File Store, and we're not currently planning on implementing File Store support unless somebody shows up and wants to do the work. But not really high on the priority list there. And so without that, I'm not sure how useful this is. There are other cases where you might want to repave OSDs because you have different.
Well, there are a lot of maintenance operations that we are adding already, that things like recharting for Blue Store or upgrading the format for Octopus, for example, that we probably want to make more easily automated. So I think that there's kind of a framework for doing those kind of per OSD, take it offline, do something to it, start it back up again. It's pretty useful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we should focus on those probably, because the way this ticket was originally envisioned, it was literally delete the old one, create a new one, but that probably isn't what we want. Or maybe it is, if we switch all this main Alex size stuff on Blue Store down to 4K and whatever, then maybe we'd actually do want something like this for Pacific that'll go through and slowly.
Possibly. It's a special case of taking OSD offline and redo it.
Yeah. But there's in order to do it efficiently, there are all these annoying tricks, just like with the file store Blue Store conversion, because you don't necessarily want to just kill the OSD in place, or else you decrease the replicate count out unless you copy data twice. Anyway.
Well, we can start with a simple version and maybe make it more efficient if we need to.
Yeah.
And especially for these operations that don't need to replace the whole disk, it's probably not so bad.
Yeah.
Recharting things took 5 or 10 minutes even for a very large store, for example.
Yeah. Oh, the Blue Store sharding. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty fast to redo that.
Okay. And we should look at the Blue Store one next. Oh, this is fixed. Oh, no, it's not. Never mind. I think the only other thing that stands out to me in this manager list is the capture exceptions and crashes card. Mm-hmm. When a daemon crashes, we have a crash report and it gets phoned home with telemetry, but if there's an exception in a manager module, we don't. It appears in the log and the user probably doesn't even see it, or maybe they do, but we don't. Figuring out a way to include that in our crash reports would be nice.
Yeah, sounds like a great idea.
Okay, so I think that's all we've got for manager. Did you want to go through the Blue Store one? We did go through it in the performance one, but not the Trello, but we did go through some items. But if you wanted to go over it, we can do that.
I think my real question is just the sharding RocksDB. It looks like that PR is shaping up. Mm-hmm. The plan to bridge that soon.
Yeah. Yep.
And then the cache stuff. There are other major things in flight. Igor had some other random patches around deferring big writes and.
Yeah, I think the performance section of our Etherpad has all the PRs, at least the ones that are open from Igor.
Okay. Cool. Okay. Sounds good.
All right. So beyond this, I guess we have, a couple more items as far as I can remember. There's the messenger one. I think that Ilya has added kernel messenger too.
Somebody brought up this compression on the wire thing the other day. A, just having compression on the wire, but also B, having some like cleverness to only compress sessions that are like crossing. This is for deploying stuff inside Amazon, only compressing the links across availability zones to reduce your bandwidth bill.
Or if they're encrypted because you can't compress it afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. I don't know how important that is, but I haven't heard other users ask for it aside from that one use case.
Okay.
What about the thing that Jason was talking about before, which was like a LibRaDOS proxy type thing, where you have like a single connection over a WAN to a remote cluster that then multiplexes out to all the other daemons that you're talking to? I wonder how important that is.
Yeah, that or the SOX proxy or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like it should be like a messenger layer proxy or something.
Yeah, I mean, so the trouble is in a Kubernetes environment, if you have like totally isolated Kubernetes clusters and all the networking is controlled by someone else, it becomes increasingly difficult to like say like, hey, this is a routable network across two Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah. 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 Almost feels like something that at the messenger, as part of the messenger layer, if there was like a different endpoint that you could talk to, and then it would multiplex all your stuff. Not to change anything else, but I don't know. That probably needs some deeper thinking.
What about the other card there, dual stack support?
Yeah, that's actually on the pad too.
Yeah, I added it there because there was some interest recently from somebody wanted to know when this is going to be included. And I just wanted to get everybody's opinion as to how important this is.
Yeah.
Is it just that it doesn't bind to the? Because I thought you support an address vector now of multiple.
Yeah. So I think that like most of the hard work is done. There's separate options for binding to v4 and v6, so you can tell a daemon to bind to both, and it will show up in your address vector. I think what's missing is some like client-side smarts that say prefer the v6 or the v4 address, or like even understanding that you might have connectivity with one or the other, which ones are routable or not. I think that's probably all that's really needed, but yeah. But I can like anticipate that that there will be cases where the client node has v6 and that v6 address, or thinks it does, and the server does, but the networks aren't like routable, or there's like some other stupid IPv6 thing, and then they just can't talk even though they could talk over v4. And I don't think we can mix the two where like they could choose one or the other because it screws up, makes everything else confusing. So, but that we could probably just blame general sad state of IPv6 deployments in the world and call it not our problem. So,
What was the second thing you mentioned there? You said the client smarts to write to the right place.
yeah. Right now, I can't remember what the logic is. I think basically they just it looks at the address spec and it just chooses the first one in the list that it supports. So, and I think it literally actually just chooses the first one because the v2 is always listed before v1, and if you can parse the address spec, then you support the v2 protocol, and so you'll always just use the v2. So it needs to basically look at the whole address spec and say, well, there I see a v4 address and a v6 address. So IPv4, IPv6, and choose which one you want to do. I think that's mostly it. Probably some config option to prefer one or the other, and or something that figures out whether the current host has a routable v6 address that it should use to do it.
Okay, cool.
That's my guess. But I'm sure
Yeah,
that there'll be other random things to fix along the way. So somebody needs to have
doesn't need a way to test this. I think the
Yeah.
current lab doesn't support v6.
Yeah. That's probably something we should fix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Is Crimson
Yes.
Messenger 2? Crimson already supports Messenger 2, right? Isn't that all it supports? It's actually a meaningful card.
Yes, it
Yeah,
does,
I
but
think so.
it cannot span to multiple addresses. Oh, engineer here. Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, it expects that to have multiple addresses. The rest of the V2 protocol is mostly implemented, and the lossless, and including the lossless connections.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
So there are just a few gaps.
No.
Sorry, did you say that one thing was missing? Multiple address support?
Yeah, multiple address. This is currently missing, and I'm not quite sure what's the requirement for the Crimson for its multiple addresses, because since
it might not need it. Like having
yeah.
V2 and V1, you mean?
Yeah, because it's mostly using V2. It doesn't
Yeah,
quite use
I think
V1.
that's fine. I think there's no point in implementing V1 for Crimson. So
yeah.
All right, maybe I'll move this to the Octopus. Okay.
Okay, so I think we've covered this one in common, I guess, script to auto-generate docs from options.cc, which I believe, Josh, you have a project for that, right? You have a GSOC
Yeah,
project.
there's a Google Smart Code project for that, so we'll get that done next summer.
Awesome. Okay, then we can probably switch back to the Etherpad. We had a couple topics. NVMe fabrics, manager, Python, sub-interpreters. Yeah.
One quick thing before we move on. There's this one card in security that's automatic key rotation for daemons. I think this one might be worth tagging. I think the way we didn't want to do it before because the monitor session wasn't encrypted. And so it was actually safer to have only the keys only pass over that session one time when you were first setting up the daemon and never again. But now that it's encrypted, then I think we actually could do this. But I think the main piece, I think it's mostly like a Ceph-ADM problem where it regenerates keys periodically and pushes them to daemons. I think the missing piece is that you have to update the key on the Mon database and you have to update the key for the daemon. And if there's a ill-timed failure, then you'll update one and not the other, or vice versa. So I think we need to do something where the monitor has like two keys that work for the same auth user while it's switching it out, and then it removes the old one. Or on the other side, the daemon has two keys that it tries to connect, then it'll try both of them. We have to implement one or the other of those behaviors. I think we can safely make that change. 2 phases or whatever.
Got it.
Yeah, I think it's not too hard.
Okay. Anything else on the Trello or? good here. All right, so yeah, going back to those two topics, do we have, I'm not sure who added these, but do we have anybody who wants to talk about NVMe fabrics and manager Python subinterpreters?
Don't think the fabric person is here. Maybe that originally proposed it. But Tim is here. We could talk about the manager Python situation.
Hey.
Hey.
So where to start? I implemented Python subinterpreters in Manager ages ago because originally there was just one interpreter, and we found that if you had multiple Manager modules that both used, say, some Python library that had some global state, or was only meant to exist once, for example, the CherryPy web server, then those two Manager modules would stomp on each other. One would be running one would work and one wouldn't, effectively. So adding subinterpreters gives us some isolation between each of the Manager modules. There's probably still problems with C libraries with global state, maybe, but we've generally done a good job of having this all work. More recently, sometime last year, the Cython folks in Cython 0.29, they added a commit that, do I have it here? They added a commit to Cython that basically stopped subinterpreters from working for us. And I hacked around that by adding a preprocessor definition to turn one of their functions into just a void or a no-op or something. And that worked, but it was horrible. So the concern is that, look, the Cython folks consider subinterpreters to be a rare thing that isn't well tested and everything. And, like Ceph and maybe Whiskey and something else. There's only 3 projects in the world that actually use these things, right? Although I found something, I think Eric Snow, who's a core Python dev, wanted to get subinterpreter things better somehow, but I'm not sure where that work is. It would probably be safer for us to somehow get rid of subinterpreters. One horrible way of doing that would be to just go back to a single interpreter and then make sure that nobody created any Manager modules that could conflict with each other. But that seems silly to me and fraught with potential problems.
And we already had multiple CherryPy users, right?
Yeah, or we might not anymore. Or something. Yeah, I thought we used to have more than we do now, but I can't remember. Anyway, so the only other options would be if we actually forked off a separate process for each Manager module, but then they need to still be able to talk to, and I see Sage shaking his head, and I honestly don't know what the right thing to do here is. We can keep potentially tussling with the Cython people when things change, which is also fun. That's the situation we're in, and doing something about it, like this is the right time to, early in Pacific is the right time to be changing it, I guess. But I honestly don't know what the right thing to do is.
Yeah.
Is there no way to isolate things more within the same process?
instead of having sub-interpreters, but have actual interpreters. But separate.
Yeah,
I
I'm
guess
just not
Python
familiar with the
itself
Python
must have.
internals here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think no, I'd have to check, but I think if you try to start multiple separate interpreters from within the same process, it'll just fall over horribly because it'll bail out or something. Let me see if I can find anything about that.
Yeah, I mean the optimist / lazy person in me thinks that if we just cross our fingers and be polite and try to hopefully the Python people won't yank it away from us.
Yeah.
This could also be an opportunity to think about scaling the manager out more, having one active manager per module, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the challenge there is that there are a lot of cases where the managers are talking to each other within the same process, and they do that under the assumption that it's efficient. Mm-hmm. And in fact, one of the nice things about the sub-interpreters is that you can just take a Python object, whatever it is, and you can pass it across sub-interpreters. And because it's the same interpreter, it all just works. Same rough counting machinery and the same GIL and all that stuff.
Here we go.
Where are we using that now? Is that just like the progress stuff so far, or are there other
progress
pieces that are
like telemetry calls into a bunch of stuff. Everything calls into the orchestrator. Yeah, maybe the orchestrator is probably like the biggest thing where it's used heavily, and probably should
as likely to be increased. Well,
although we're not passing big data structures around.
I've just put a link to a PEP in the Etherpad, which is a very long thing, which Eric Snow did about a proposal for multiple interpreters in the Python standard library, and a whole bunch of. It even mentions that we're using not a widely used feature. The only documented cases are mod whiskey, OpenStack Ceph. I shouldn't say OpenStack there, but anyway, and JEP. So,
whatever that is.
Yeah. So it looks like there's something that, it looks like Eric's keen on doing something for provisionally in Python 3.8 and something more in Python 3.9. So it may, the best thing to do may well be to wait and actually read that PEP again and see where we end up.
I wonder also, so the thing that I remember most about the thread that I participated in, this was like a year ago on the Python list or the Python list, was they were basically saying sub-interpreters are horribly broken because some Python modules will use C libraries, and C libraries might have shared global state. So therefore, everything will break. Do sub-interpreters at all, which annoyed me because like the particular Python modules that we care about don't do that. So,
yeah.
But sort of going the other direction back to a single interpreter and some like one instance is that it's basically the same problem, except that you have poorly written Python modules that don't let you instantiate multiple instances. They have global state. And so I wonder if this is basically pushing people towards using better Python libraries. And if you do use a bad one, you can only do it once. Only one module gets to do it, and whoever gets there first wins or whatever. Might not be so bad. Like if Cherry Pie was the one that was causing problems, the dashboard is a huge user, so we probably don't want to touch that one. But Prometheus probably wouldn't be that hard to convert Prometheus to use something other than Cherry Pie or whatever it was. I don't remember.
Try to centralize the imports as well, so that each module doesn't get to import all these things. But for any of these like potentially problematic modules, the manager itself has some that imports them, and doesn't let the modules do it. Like,
Yeah.
do we have a list of the problematic libraries somewhere? Or?
Cherry Pie is just the one that came to mind.
Yeah. Cherry Pie was the one that caused me to implement this thing in the first place, because that was the one that was breaking, and I don't know if we've hit anything that's broken since, because we've got subinterpreters going. So
yeah. I guess my suggestion would be to wait and see. Hopefully Python, whatever, does something nice, either making subinterpreters work better or multiple interpreters. But in the worst case scenario where they don't do that, then we can do sort of plan B, which is, eliminate multiple users of poorly written Python modules.
Yeah.
Or there's a compromise in the middle where with Python, like get something where we can opt in RADOS and RBD as part of the compile process.
Yeah. Maybe a minimum would just be to get rid of that annoying hack you had to do to just make it work. So that there's a way to use the API without a reload.
Yeah. Brad's just asking on the chat. We can't hear him apparently, but he was wondering if it's worth considering migrating some of the modules to C++, or could we support modules written in different languages?
Yeah, any of the current module functionality could be done in C++, I think. It's just a lot more work.
Yeah.
And you don't have all the module machinery around it, but I don't know that you would need it. You can just compile it in and always be there.
Yep. Well, as a concrete action item, I'll go and read that PEP that I linked and see if I can find out anything. See what I can find out. Maybe I'll have a chat with Eric Snow and see if I can find out anything more from upstream Python folks about what they think about this sort of thing. And yeah, I agree. Let's just sort of, with what you said, Sage, about moving forwards cautiously, optimistically, or
yeah. Okay.
All right. I think we've finished all the topics that were listed here. Does anybody have anything else on their minds?
I can't think of anything.
No? Okay. I think we're good then.
Awesome.
Thanks everyone for joining, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
See you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.